Good afternoon, everybody. For some reason, I feel like there was a competing event, maybe somewhere nearby. Yes,
all those protesters.
Yeah.
they were on the wrong side of the street.
Go home, Tim.
Could you?
Anyway, so I know him, and he's going to heckle me this whole time, I have a feeling. My name's Tim Carnahan. I'm the Director of Next Gen Learning at Leap Innovations in Chicago. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I have three terrific school leaders and a national thought partner and thought leader in school design with us today. Andy Calkins from the NGLC. To give you a broad structure of the experience, we're going to do some introductions, launch a conversation on stage, and then I'm going to open up questions sort of in the middle too and at the end just to get a conversation started. So if you have something you want to ask the panel, feel free to think of it. Right? He's got something right now, so please wait until the middle, sir.
No, he's a protester.
Okay. Yeah, but it's hard to sit on those questions till the end. So, yeah. So, with us we have Wayne Bevis, principal of Lindblom, Dr. LeViis Haney, principal of Lovett Elementary School in Chicago, Karin Breo, director of CICS Irving Park School, a K-8 school in Chicago. All three of these schools have gone through the Breakthrough Schools Whole School Redesign Program in Chicago as part of Leap Innovations, which is generously funded by the NGLC and Andy Calkins. And to start, we're going to do some introductions. And to quickly get to the heart of the conversation, I gave some parameters around these introductions. But in the broader spirit of choice and personalized learning, the panelists have different options to organize their introductions. They could make a haiku, they could do a movie poster tagline, they could come up with like a tweet length sort of introduction of their school and self. And so in the interest of owning this nonsense that I asked them to go through, I wrote a haiku for myself. Helping guide school change in personalized learning used to train school leaders. And I think that's 575, right? So Andy, do you want to start on your end? Well, thank you very much.
That was so beautiful, wasn't it? I mean, Tim, that was
thank you very much.
Beautiful.
That's great.
Yeah, you sure you want to start with me?
Okay, well,
no, I'm ready to.
Okay, go.
So I went animal, vegetable, mineral, and my animal is wolf. And that's not what you're thinking. I chose wolf because, raise your hand if you've heard the TED Talks and the other stuff or read the book about how reintroducing wolves into Yellowstone ended up changing the course of the rivers. Oh my God, what? Yes, that's what happened. And so I was searching for a metaphor that says, in these schools where it's all working, everything is connected to and related to and dependent on everything else.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Karin?
I went with a haiku. I lead Irving Park, flex spaces, learner profiles, always evolving.
Great.
Nice.
Good job. Lovely.
That's nice.
LeViis?
Nice. I didn't do it.
Hashtag.
So my name is LeViis from Lovett, where we want our learners to love it at Lovett.
Love
Very
it.
good.
Nice, nice, love it.
My name's Wayne Bevis. I'm the principal at Lindblom, and so I guess it's a hashtag, I'm not sure, but new principal, big change. And so day one last year was my first day as principal of Lindblom, and we've done all the change since then. And so a lot of change really quickly, and I'll leave it at that until we get into the questions.
Great, okay. So our topic today is lessons in change management through a personalized learning transformation. And principals, you are living this process now. All of you are within your second year of school transformation. So I'm going to toss the first question to Dr. Haney, but would love to hear from Karin and Wayne. If you could take a time machine back to pre-transformation, before you started doing all this crazy personalized learning work with your school and your community, what are one or two pieces of advice that you would give yourself related to the change process?
What piece of advice would I give myself? First of all, you can't do too much too soon. I think we all want to change, and we want to change everything all at once. And so I think smaller, more incremental change is more is more realistic and it's less stressful. But on the same token, I also want to advise myself to not sweat the small stuff, to be okay with some of the stress, because there does have to be a certain amount of pressure to put on the people who service our students, because we have to do things differently. So that's the advice I would give myself.
Could you give me an example, or give us an example of like one of those small things that you feel like in retrospect you're like, I shouldn't have really been worrying about that?
Like for instance, like don't worry about, like when you introduce something new, no one likes anything new, including me, right? So you can't get bent out of shape when people are sort of grumbling about change, because change is a process. And so I think at first, you know, as we started to implement the different innovations that we have at our school, you know, I was just highly sensitive to the fact that I wanted people to be comfortable when what we've ultimately done with our school, like it took some uncomfortability, it took uncomfortable moments, it took tough conversations, and it's okay, and it's part of the process, and that process should continue. It should be a cycle of continuous, you know, change and uncomfortability.
And what about Karin or Wayne? Do you want to jump in? Advice to yourself in the past?
I think it would be finding things, small things, as easy wins. Like making sure that you're creating these easy wins for your team as you're going through the process, and so that you can celebrate those. And then also just the relationship, the trusting relationship, how important that is, just in regards to getting your staff to feel comfortable with change, as LeViis mentioned, but also being okay with failing, trying something new, changing it. I think that was a big thing for us, and I think that we did do a pretty good job of that. But just when we go back and really start that process, or if you're starting the process, anyone in the audience, just making sure that you're sticking to that, and making sure that they trust you, your team trusts you, they can move forward with change and be okay and comfortable with maybe it not working.
So what's an example of one of those like short-term wins that ended up having like a long-term gain in your work at Irving Park?
I think one of our short-term wins was just, we were struggling at one point. We started getting really transparent with one another, which was, you know, uncomfortable. But we were struggling. It was probably October of the beginning of the school year. And things were getting hard, and we were struggling with some of our students in the flexible learning spaces. And I had to say I didn't know the answer to something, and we had to reach out and just kind of go see it in another school. And so that was something for us that really changed. When we came back, we had a different mindset. It was going out to see, you know, something in action and seeing that something was attainable. But again, staying really transparent with one another through that.
And then I want to dig in on the trust comment that you made too. So everyone talks about the importance of building trust and relationships through this process, but how do you know, like what's evidence of trust in action at the school? Like how do you actually know or see or hear and feel that it's actually happening, and that you have that social capital that you can spend for people to take risks?
I think through high levels of collaboration for us. There's a lot of conversation, weekly meetings. There's so much conversation about the work that we're doing, and everyone being okay to say, hey, I think we need to step back. I don't think this is working. And then we're asking those questions of why isn't it working? How do we need to change it? And then the teachers being okay with saying that they need help or they need to see a change. I think that's been a key for us.
Great. Wayne?
I would echo the trust part. In terms of one of the things I would step back and change was just really over communicating to the parents the need for the change. Like our outcomes were good before, but why? What was the impetus? Like we said it, but really overemphasizing to the parents that yes, we're good, but we can get to here, and this is where that gap is, and this is how it can get there. And so really working with the parents around bringing in that trust and communicating to them, yes, there may be new aspects to it, but your children aren't guinea pigs either. Here's the research, but really making sure they understand the why for the change.
Do you feel like you under-communicated with parents at the beginning, or?
At the time, I felt like we did a great job of it.
Right.
I would say now I see a difference, right? In terms of communicating the why behind it, and continuing of why we're changing and what are our growth marks along the way of are we attaining those, is it actually benefiting them? But really going back and giving the why. And so as I said before, like I started as principal the day before school started. And so some of that I wasn't able to do because I was brand new principal. I was the AP before, but making sure, you know, the year before communicating throughout of this is why we need to make the change.
Great. And Andy, from your perspective nationally, does this scan from other schools that you've heard through the NGLC network about the change process and what people run into?
Yeah, I'm hearing threads all up and down the row up here that we've seen in our models. The one I'll tease out a little bit is the trust factor, and the lesson that I'd say all of our grantees have learned, which is the degree to which they have to figure out the right blend of tight and loose in terms of establishing a vision and a sort of thin layer of structure and support and operating habits. But beyond that, and this goes for districts down to schools and schools working with teachers and actually teachers working with kids in their classroom, it's all about enabling the people who you're working with. You know, you're in a really well-designed, well-operating next-gen learning model. Every layer defines its success in terms of enabling the success of the layer right underneath it, and that's their job. That's how they see their job.
Can you give an example of like a model or something within a model where that's evident?
Well, so one of the most articulate spokespeople for that way of thinking is Diane Taverner, who's doing a keynote here tonight, whenever it is.
Yeah.
At Summit Schools in the Bay Area. She says, you know, you can tell. If you walk up to anybody in a Summit school that's doing a really, you know, fully built out version of what they are envisioning, and ask a kid, ask a teacher, ask a school leader, ask somebody at the central organization who owns the work, they'll say, I do. And the part that we own is X and Y and Z. But most of that is around helping the people that we're working with right underneath us feel that if you asked them that question, they would say, well, we own it. You know, so it's this sort of cascading, nested, agency-driven sense of ownership that produces, a sort of flywheel of learning that has a momentum all of its own.
Terrific. So thinking about what Andy just said and thinking about the models and that and your vision for the transformation at your school, and go back to you, Dr. Haney. Can you talk a little bit about what the current vision and sort of work happening at Lovett is, and what do you think maybe the two or three steps were to get you there over the last year and a half?
The larger overall vision, which did shift for us, by the way. At one point, we asked people in our school, like, what's the vision? And then we got those blank faces like, and it's, we read about this all the time about, is your vision alive or is it just on the wall? Is it just a meaningless statement? And I think it's something that my first few years, it wasn't a priority. And then it became very, very necessary for us to align all of our change efforts. And so our vision was literally for our students to love learning. Like, we felt that our students were disconnected from learning. How many school leaders do we have in the room, by a show of hands? So we as school leaders, we want to solve this problem of we want all of our students to learn, right? We want all of our students to be successful. But for our students didn't like school. But our motto was we want our students to love it and love it. And so we really had to really put our money where our mouths were. And we had to look at our vision. What is our vision? What are we all here for? And so as we sort of started to define that vision, that we wanted our students to love learning, then the next question was, well, how? And so all of our sort of change efforts were around, we want our students to enjoy the experience of learning. We want our students to be connected to what they're learning. So this took a different approach to the way teachers planned. It took a different approach to the way our students even saw themselves in the education process. I can go on and on about how our vision sort of started that ball rolling, but that's how important the vision was, having a clear, aligned vision and one that all of our teachers saw they felt it, they understood it. So if you come to Lovett now, please ask my teachers what's the vision, and they should be able to tell.
When it
They
sounds
better.
like it evolved out of the context of your community and your students, right? Which I think is a big part of how this change process gets rooted and becomes sticky for schools. And I know this was a big part of your change transition, Karin. So could you talk a little bit about the importance of acknowledging and recognizing CICS Irving Park's individual context and how that informed your change efforts?
Sure. So at our school, similar to what Wayne was talking about earlier, was we had a school that was pretty high performing. Things were going really well. When I came in, and I came in as change management and also starting personalized learning as a redesign. And so when we started the work, it was about how are we going to get families and students and teachers to understand that this change can still do something like great for our school. It was a good school, but the cliche, good to great, how are we gonna get there and why do we wanna do it? And so I think that we really started working with the why around it. And as we began, we really rooted ourselves in empathy for our students and families and all the stakeholders for our school. And so really sitting down, we developed a design thinking professional development for a few weeks, and we had the teachers interviewing students after school for, I think we were all in rooms in separate places in the school for about an hour, and just really surveying students and getting their information on what school felt like for them. Another change that we really wanted to have our vision move toward was engagement. The students were really not engaged in class. They were pretty compliant. You'd walk into a classroom, students are doing what they're supposed to do. Things were looking okay, but we knew that students weren't really engaged in the learning and making connections to that learning. And so, through our vision, really just getting the students engaged, excited about coming to school, and getting to hear their voice and let them feel like they have voice and choice in our school. The number one thing that came back from those empathy conversations from the students was they wanted to be able to move around. They felt like they had to sit in their seats all day long, and they wanted opportunities to move around in their classrooms.
Great. And Wayne, so you're at the high school level, grades 7 through 12. Could you talk a little bit about how that process, 1,300 kids at Lindblom, how the process might have looked a little bit different in terms of solidifying that vision for a school that large, and then also with a different student population?
Yeah, so when we decided to make the change, we came at it not with the end goal of personalization or proficiency-based learning. What we saw was the gap between our GPAs and other similar schools. So our ACT test scores are up here with them, but their GPAs were here and ours were there. And so our local school council, which is made up of parents, students, and staff, spent a year looking at what's causing that and what can we do, and looking at various research. And so we approached it as of how do we solve that gap. And so along the way, we implemented small things along the way, including a revision policy. But we're at the point now where we've done these things and we've moved away from what our vision is. And so the end of this school year, over the summer and the fall, we're actually re-envisioning our mission and vision and core beliefs of the school to see, does that align with our personalized approach, which we believe it does, and we believe that's the best approach, but making sure that everything we do as a school aligns with that as well.
Okay. So thinking about the barriers that pop up through this process, Andy, I'm going to pitch this to you, just thinking first, what are the common barriers that you've seen schools nationally run into once they get started? there's a certain amount of risk that you need to take as a leader. You have to spend some social capital getting people started. Oftentimes, you can get people motivated through just changes in sort of technical systems, like Wayne was mentioning, with trying to identify like a key problem to solve, or you could just identify like a vision for student experience, right? But there are going to be barriers that pop up through this process that are going to impede the scaling and sustainability. What are some of those kind of common things you've seen in your, from your perspective nationally?
Well, we could spend this whole panel and this whole hour listing all the sort of individual barriers. And to me, many of them are more symptoms of the Uber barrier, which is that there's a sort of magnetic polar attraction back to the comfort zone of what we all know. You know, we all went to school. We all know what school is. School has a 5th grade. School is divided into 48-minute periods.
Yeah.
So even though, you know, when you're in a room of almost anybody these days, and you say, just give us a minute and you know, tell me what skills today's first graders are going to need when they graduate from high school, what comes back is a pretty rich tapestry of 21st century skills. It's always collaboration and critical thinking and decision making and communicating and so on. And nobody ever says, well, you know, a score of X on Algebra 2. So people get that. But then we have this inexhaustible capacity for holding that idea and the idea of what sort of powerful, genuine, lasting learning looks like, because we all did that, usually in an extracurricular, and what school looks like. And so it's figuring out the right small successes, inroads, and pathways to help people experience, you know, what it feels like to have that kind of learning, where the system and the school model has actually enabled it instead of made it hard or made it extra. You know, is like the principal way to go at that Uber barrier.
Okay.
Yeah.
And thinking about that, I think too, a lot of schools that we work with, or a lot of schools I've seen, they get really strong pilots going in 1 or 2 classrooms, and there's a leading sort of coalition of pioneering teachers who get the work started. And then when the idea comes to start scaling or sustaining the work across the rest of the school, it becomes hard because you've created this beautiful, amazing thing that you don't want to mess around with or break. And then you end up rolling back to trying to protect what was unique about that, as opposed to getting messy and doing the work of actually trying and failing and learning from it, right? Is that something that you as leaders, you guys have run into? Just, hey, we've got this thing rolling. I don't know if I really want to tinker with it anymore, but you might actually have to tinker with it in order to make other people sort of embrace it and move forward?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
So in year 1, we were really focused on student learning regardless of when. And so we had a policy in place around missing or revisions that students could always turn in their assessment regardless of when, as long as it showed their growth and their attainment of this skill. And so what we found, though, was the sustainability for the teachers to maintain and the organizational systems to maintain that over time. And so after the first year, we did go back and limit it to 2 weeks. But even though we did that, and that was based on consulting with the teachers and the students about time, because even the students, like, it ended up being too much for them to manage. I'm still getting from the teachers, typically the ones that do the least anyway, oh, it's too much. It's too much. 2 weeks is still too much. And like, but being willing to hold the line and say, no, you've got to give the student an opportunity to show their growth and their learning.
It's kind of getting back to what Andy was saying about being tight on some aspects of the design and being loose on some others, right? Anything from your experience, Dr. Haney or Karin?
You know, you know, I know the parents in the room will resonate with this. It's when you know how something should be, and then you want to tell the kids, like, don't do that. Well, what does the kids do? They do it anyway, right? And so it's like you go through these experiences and throughout the change process, and like you said, Tim, there was lessons to be learned from the struggle, from not agreeing, from sort of building this organic sort of process together as a group. And so then you start that with this small cohort of people, and then you get through all of the stress and the strain of it all, and then you finally get to a place where, like, wow, this is kind of working a little bit. And then you take a new group, and then you want them to just work. But they have to go through the same process again. They have to build for themselves. They have to feel that ownership of the process themselves, and when you want to sort of accelerate them through that. So that's been a challenge for me as I've been scaling the workout, is making sure that as we bring people on, we're taking them through the process, and I have to take myself kind of backwards a little bit and almost pretend that I don't know a roadblock is coming, because this group has to experience it.
Right.
Right, and I think that there was something really special about our pilots too. You know, we were all learning together with this cohort of teachers and other staff members in the building, and there was something really special about that experience. And there was a lot of celebration, there were a lot of hard times, but we became really close. And I think one thing that we had to be cognizant of too was we couldn't leave anybody out either. You know, we didn't want to form this circle around this special thing that was happening, and we had to be kind of all inclusive. And then as we redesigned this year, it was really funny, one of our first professional developments, as we were getting survey results from teachers, reading all of that, and some of their answers, we were just like, what? I can't believe this is what they're answering. And then we had to take a step back. They haven't been through this process. And so we kind of made the analogy, like when you're a teacher, I taught second grade. And so when the second graders leave you, you know, they're ready for third grade, you know? And when you start the year, you forget that, oh, these kids are really first graders that you're getting, you know? And so just their experience is so different, and they're at a different place. And I think it didn't take us long to realize we needed to be fair and really get under that notion of we've got to build this up now.
And I think too, an analogy that resonates with me and what you're talking about is that when you take these pioneering teachers, you're going on like a hike to the top of Pikes Peak, and then if you look back and everyone else hasn't gone through that process and just saying, be here right now, they're not going to go through the development of actually building their own capacity to get there. So Michael Fullen, who is one of my favorite change management people, has a quote that's, clarity follows capacity, which is that in organizations, the organization's functioning and value becomes clearer the more capacity is being developed among the adults who are working within that organization, right? And I feel like what you're getting at vibes with that quote, that you are building up the capacity of others to try and fail and improve their practice, but you actually have to do that process with the other people in the building in order to build up their confidence, right?
For sure.
And one part of that is building that sort of clear bubble, transparent bubble around the pilot so people can see what's going on in that area of the school so they become comfortable with it.
Right.
But there's a risk there, right?
For sure.
Can I just add
of
a
course.
comment here? I mean, this is so crucial, and triply crucial, because all this is part of the through line that reaches down to the experience that we're trying to bring to the kids, right? It's all about building agency on the part of everyone, all the participants. And so, you know, we do the same thing all the time. We build the beautiful model, and those people kill themselves trying to create it, and most of the value that produces the great model is because of the self-killing, you know, because they invested their whole selves. And then we say, okay, cohorts 2, 3, 4, and 5, just do what they did, you know, and that's not going to work, period. But it's so not going to work when all of this is about agency building at every level.
Yeah, that's great. And in the interest of agency building, I said this at the front end, that we're going to open up questions to the audience twice, sort of midway, which is like now, and then at the end. So Chris, I think you're our mic runner. If Chris has the microphone, if anyone has any questions for the panel at this time, please raise your hand. I'll look, and if no one does, I'll keep asking questions and we can keep conversing, but I wanted to open that up for the audience. Looks like we got someone there.
Talk to us about like the assessments and the tech that you used to kind of personalize the learning for each student.
Okay. Who wants to jump on that in terms of like the technology or assessments that you're using to measure personalization in your school?
I'll say something quick.
Yeah.
We're one-to-one. We have iPads in kindergarten through second grade, and then we have Chromebooks for 3rd through 8th graders. A big thing about technology is we want to have a balance of the use of technology in our school. So as a parent and all the parents of my school community, they don't want to think that their child's coming to school every single day just sitting on a piece of technology. The technology is a tool that we're using to enhance learning and making sure that the teachers understand that the families are able to understand that it's just a tool. It's not something that we're using all day long, every single day. And then the assessment piece, I think, like, as we're doing as far as personalizing the learning for students, I would say that we're using a lot of entrance and exit type tickets. The teachers are doing a lot with feedback with students, sitting and getting feedback. Also, we have mentors in 6th through 8th grade. So the mentors are doing a lot with just giving the students feedback with those assessments and then helping them to understand what they need to do and go back to and fix before they turn it in again.
I think in our school, we probably use technology a little bit more. Our school, our demographics is 93% are on free and reduced lunch. 84% African American, 16% Hispanic, and our kids come to us very, very low. And so when it comes to some of the basic skills so that students can access content at grade level, we wanted to give our teachers some tools so that kids can really get that practice, so that teachers aren't spending the majority of their time teaching remedial skills. And so we use some of the programs that really help to bridge those gaps. And we put systems around the usage of the program so that kids are actually doing the computer work and not just on the computer. You know the difference. You can't just stick kids on the computer. That's what we used to do in like our old blended model. We bought a bunch of Chromebooks and then we threw the kids on the computer like, hey, look at our kids, they're on the computer. Whereas now it's a lot more meaningful. Students are tracking their own progress and teachers are conferencing with students every week to see and ensure that students are moving in the right direction. And for us, it's really helping to boost student achievement, because otherwise, where would kids get this remedial education? You talk about after-school programs and things of that nature, and if you're familiar with our context in Chicago, we're losing money. We're losing money for after-school programs. I'm not going to talk about the national landscape on after-school programs, but we're going to have to start thinking outside the box as far as how we remediate students that need that additional support. So that's how we use technology. In terms of assessment has to be personalized as well, because all of our kids are at different places, and so our teachers have to meet often to determine what assessment is appropriate for each particular group of students. So it's a difference. It's a big shift for our teachers. We used to plan out assessments, and here's the textbook, and after a set period of time, it was time to take the assessment. The student got the grade, put the grade in grade book, that's it. The kid got enough, they got enough, right? Well, it's a different story now for our kids, and so it's an ongoing process for us week by week as far as planning out instruction, aligning the technology, and then the assessments.
So from a demographic perspective, my school is pretty similar to Lovett in terms of student demographic. The difference is Lindblom's a selective enrollment high school, so students test in at 7 or 9. And so instead of focusing on the students that are behind, we really focus on how do we accelerate our students forward. And so we use different software. One of the big things that we use, we don't really find good software in terms of like biology or physics or content specific, because it seems to max out about our students' freshman level. But what we look for is software that the students can use as a tool. And so we have a software where students will actually sign up each week for flex classes. So on Wednesdays, they sign up for 3 different classes for extra tutoring or enrichment where they need extra help. So Thursday through Tuesday, they sign up. Tuesday night, they get an email of what their schedule is going to be for Wednesday, and then they follow that schedule on Wednesday for that extra support as needed or for that acceleration. And so that's a big help on our part, is to give them that extra personalized support or push as they need it.
I want to grab onto the assessment concept too, because I actually think that the concept of assessment and the whole paradigm of assessing in schools is one of the hardest things that people grapple with overcoming. I think when we started doing this work at LEAP and I would work with schools, the assessment was almost always defined as an end of unit assessment or an interim assessment at 6 weeks that was standards aligned. And I think one of the things that we've really been working with people to unlearn is this idea that assessment only exists in those formats. And so Andy, I wanted to pitch it to you just because you've got a good sort of overview nationally about the different ways that people are talking about assessment now, because I really think that conversation is changing.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those conversations with teachers and stakeholders that is critical to the change management process.
Couldn't agree with you more. And yes, there's a really robust level of discussion and innovation happening nationally around this question. My favorite one-sentence observation is an educator in the Midwest we quote on a resource that I'll give you in a second, who says, assessment should be understood as the set of processes by which a student becomes known in a school, right? And when you look at it that way, assessment, I mean, it still has its appropriate role as a monitor on the progress of the school as a whole and the performance of individual kids in classrooms and so on. But mostly assessment's role needs to be rebranded and re-understood as being an integral part of learning. That's how most of our national breakthrough models would understand it. And we've recently tried to track what that means. You know, they all say proficiency in math and ELA is important, but if that's this wide, our definition of success for our kids is like this wide, good, but what are you doing to measure your school's performance on that, and how do you measure student progress across all those other competencies? You can find some of the results of that research at the report microsite, which is called measuresthatmattermost.org. Might be measuring what matters most, but at any rate, it's one of those two. And all the rest of it can be found at a site called MyWays. You can find that at myways.nextgenlearning.org. And there's a really rich, and it's going to become richer over the next 4 or 5 weeks, set of discussions around how the whole mindset and set of practices around the role and purposes and forms of assessment in schools is beginning to shift in really significant ways.
How have conversations with teachers in your buildings changed over the course of this implementation from before you started? Like, what kinds of new conversations or different conversations are you having that are surprising to you?
One thing that I think that's changed is the way that we're looking at data and assessments now has changed the way groupings are happening in classrooms. And I think even through the pilot, one thing that started happening pretty quickly and pretty naturally was that the groups became so fluid. And so, you know, like the first times that we were sitting at the table to really put kids into groups based on, you know, program data, assessments, it took a long time to kind of get the kids into the right groups. And then as we really started thinking about it differently and taking in different data points, it helped with the fluidity of the groups and the groupings and where kids were on different days. And we were able to really get the groupings, like they were happening at a really quick pace compared to maybe we were only switching groups once a week or twice a week, whereas now it's getting really fluid and it's basically daily that they're switching different groups to master standards.
Great. Wayne, Dr. Haney?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for our conversations, it shifted to how do we make sure the student's successful instead of a lot of teachers before define success and proficiency as a C, but to how are they showing the proficiency in the skill, but also moving away from the confusion of are they not successful because of it being late or a behavior impacting that, and having a clear data set that teachers can look at that's purely based on the skill, because we've broken out what we call the habits of lifelong learners, the SEL, executive functioning, separate, that the students get the separate report on. And so helping teachers have that conversation about how do these behaviors impact the academic success, but parents and students getting that data and having conversations around those separately instead of being merged and murky in terms of what is the student actually learning.
Right?
I think at Lovett, our teachers, I think they all went into teaching so they can do their own thing. I really do believe that. I think I own my own business. It's my classroom. I'm closing my door and I'm doing what I want. And so it was a shift having to change and folks actually having to work together. I mean, we found out some pretty interesting things. Like, we found out that a lot of our teachers didn't even like each other. You know, they didn't know much about each other. They didn't trust each other. And so through the process, anytime teachers were having conversations, it wasn't really about what was going on in their classrooms. It wasn't, unless it was something bad going on in their classrooms. Little Johnny did this, or, or et cetera. Whereas the conversation shifted from these kids to our kids. And I think that's been the most gratifying pickup that I've seen with the conversations with teachers. They're a lot more positive. They're a lot more results oriented, in regards to what can we shift and change to meet the needs of our students. So I would say that was the biggest shift in conversations.
So, how did you get there though, right? So the idea is that how intense was your intervention as a leader at the beginning, and when could you start releasing control because the group dynamic started to support that healthier sort of set of conversations?
I think in the beginning, I was the most involved, and I sort of created the emergency conditions. And I think the people that may not have liked each other that much, they were kind of forced to work with each other, sort of to save their own lives, if you will. And so I think you go through something when you kind of are forced to sort of work together. And then after, then it was like, hey, Dr. Haney wants this, and how are we going to do that? Well, we might as well work together to figure this thing out. And that started the creating the context for working together. Whereas now our teachers, they work through, like, people ask us when they come in and see our school and the things that teachers have been able to do with kids. Well, how did the teachers do that? Where did they find the time? Well, they find their own time now because we've created that context where teachers feel that for us to be successful and to truly meet the needs of our students, we'll do better working together. And so once that took place, then I was able to step back. But you see it. You start to see. You walk past classrooms, and all of a sudden teachers are huddled up. Then you take a couple of steps back to kind of take a peek in, and they're talking about problems of practice and things of that nature. And it's very gratifying to see conversations shift in that direction.
So most conversations about change management are focused on activities on the part of the leaders, right? This is what leaders should do in order to facilitate the work of others. But there's also an internal journey that's going on with you as a leader because you're taking risks and you're going through a change. So what fears did you grapple with through this process, and how do you work with those to keep moving forward?
I'll take that one. So in Chicago, we get 4-year contracts, and like I said, day one was my first day. And so I didn't have a contract the whole first year. So that was my fear, is this is going to blow up.
Oh my.
So much for the principalship. I guess I'll go back to being a special ed teacher. And so there was a real drive throughout for me to make sure that I was empowering teachers so that they felt it was theirs, and so that they could have that teapot with just enough simmer that they were working together and collaborating and figuring out answers. Because myself, with 86 teachers, I couldn't do it all by myself.
Right.
I think for me it was just stakeholder readiness, all the different people that you're working with, whether it was teachers, students, parents, how are we really going to get everyone to understand the why of this change, and making sure that we didn't lose kids and their growth and what we owe kids to grow every single year, but really just making sure that everyone was ready, and if they weren't, how are we going to get them on board? How are we going to sit down and have those conversations that this is what's going to be best for kids at the forefront.
Great.
For us, it was please don't fail. Because as a school leader, when you're charged with making the decisions of the school that is going to heavily impact the way people work, it's kind of all eyes on you. But the great thing about the shift is sharing that problem and actually sitting down and building solutions together. People were more invested in things working. And so that helped bring down the pressure. And quite frankly, it just increased the likelihood that the things that people were working on to innovate and change and shift practice for our school would actually take root and move in a positive direction because the people wanted it to. It wasn't me making the decisions in a silo and then everybody looking and watching like, okay, let's see if that works.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to open the floor for questions. So don't be shy. Got a couple.
Good afternoon. I want to know, how did you receive support from your central office through this process? If your district schools, public schools, other schools doing traditional route and you're doing non-traditional, what support did you receive from their aspect of the work?
I'll get started. When we started in the work, our school was let's just call it our rating, our school rating, if you will, was sort of in the middle, sort of teetering towards like being on probation. So I think it would have been easy for the district, and we're split up in networks in Chicago. I don't know if you're familiar or not. And so our network could have easily said, no, you're not doing those things. You know, we want to make sure that you're scoring high on the assessment. So here's what we want you to do. And so I have to give a lot of credit to our district for even allowing a school like mine to engage in the work that we did. A lot of times kids who aren't performing well and from low socioeconomic backgrounds, they get the most prescriptive interventions. They get more school. They get more of it. Like, this didn't work, so let's give them some more. You know, instead of doing things differently. And agency, please, you know, there wasn't even a belief that our kids could take agency over their own learning. Whereas you look at the kids now and they're performing at a higher level, they're more engaged in their own work. And so I give a lot of credit to our district and to my boss personally for believing in us and believing that we were doing something right for kids.
We have, just by context, so Karin's school is a charter school. LeViis and Wayne are both district managed schools in Chicago.
I think one thing that I would say about that is just as far as my management company is Distinctive Schools, and I think that our approach is personalized learning. I mean, everything that we do, we're building from the ground up together, and I think that that's been easy to bring back to our campuses. But then the other piece I wanted to talk about is just the bridge that we've been able to to have through this process. And we talked about this last year, was just, you know, charter and the district schools don't always work so closely together and maybe don't have the best relationship at times, but this opportunity and the planning through NGLC and LEAP and the support that we've all had working together has really, created an opportunity to kind of bring back the charters in Chicago and what they were originally started for, and that was to be innovative and to share practices with the district schools. And I feel like that's something that we've been able to kind of circle back to, and that feels really good in Chicago.
Yeah. Another question?
This is more for Dr. Haney. Did you have any resistance from your unions, or what was your involvement with them for pre-conversations or getting buy-in?
That's a really, really good question. Initially, yes, particularly when I kind of threw out the textbooks. They wanted my head on a platter. I almost fizzed out the first year. But I think once we got past that, it was a lot of selling. Let's face it, when you're making major shifts in practice, you got to take the people who are going to, whether you like it or not, the leaders of your building, your union leaders. I had to get those people on board, and it was a series of conversations, including them in on the process, listening to any pushback or fears on their part, and it's been really, really great. My union person, she goes to all the union meetings and all the different things that the union is telling teachers to do. It doesn't happen in our school, and so I'm really, really proud of that. But I would say that when you're embarking on change, and change is significant as we've gone through in our schools, you have to identify all of the important stakeholders, and whether you think they're important or not,
They're going to be.
They're going to be, and people are listening to those people, and so it's important for me to work with those people, and we have a very good relationship. If you don't, it's going to make the work that much harder.
I think we have time for one more question really quick. Chris? I think gentleman right here. I'm sorry.
Most of what you talked about is personalized learning at the student level. My focus is on personalized learning for teachers and their professional development. Could you talk about the extent to which that's happening in your schools as well? The personalized learning is extending to teachers in addition to students.
Again.
You want to grab it?
My quick answer is modeling. We're trying to model personalized learning for the teachers, like we want them to model personalized learning and get the kids involved with personalized learning as well. Our professional development, we are taking surveys with teachers so that we can figure out at what point their entry level is when we're going into flex learning environments, learner profiles, and really taking them through the process. And so identifying points of practice, having professional growth plans that they're in like each week, basically. They're going in and observing one another and giving one another feedback. We have instructional coaches that are also identifying with those professional growth areas all around, like based on personalized learning, and then just refining that and having, you know, professional roundtable discussions where the teachers are sitting around the table with one of the coaches, but they're leading that conversation.